Were they key influential people to you, or were there others who, now obviously your father himself, but who were the people you kind of look back on as saying, or currently, you know, as saying,
well,
these are the men?
All the people in labor, people like the Ruthers, people like Frank Martell, all the presidents of the UAW. The steel workers have always been very important in my affairs, the building trades. First race that I ran in, we had wonderful help from the engineers, from the carpenters, from the building trades folks. They all showed up and with their sleeves rolled up, and they all went to work.
All right.
And I had one of my particular friends and ideals or idols was Soapy Williams, who's a great friend of mine, and a great governor. Ran a clean governor, ran a clean administration, and remade this state. Gave us a good legislature, saw to it that our education was improved, did a lot of other things too.
He was seen as a Democratic Party reformer.
He was both. He was a leader on civil rights outside.
Right.
He was a reformer inside the party. He had a great friend by the name of Neil Stabler who worked his heart out. He was the chairman of the party, and he had some other wonderful people who participated actively in not only rebuilding the party. When my dad was elected to Congress, you could hold a Democratic Party convention in a telephone booth. And with Roosevelt in 32, all of a sudden we had a lot of Democrats, but we had no real organization. Democrats have always been a very disorganized kind of a rabble in terms of how they functioned. Soapy, working with others in the party, including my dad, both changed that so that the party got a better organizational structure and better organization. And he converted this from a solidly Republican state to a fighting state where the Democrats had a pretty good chance. He got control of the Supreme Court, the legislature. We had the worst legislature in the country. It was so regarded. Soapy came along and changed it so that it was, legislature was regarded rather highly in the legislature and in those who judge those matters. And that was Soapy's legacy. He brought in people like Phil Hart, who was a great senator and a wonderful friend of mine. And he left the state in good financial condition. He left the state with a good mental health program, first-class education program. They began to look at and to be concerned about the environment. Of course, that was going on at that time. As you remember, we were trying to get the waters cleaned up. We thought the Great Lakes were going to be lost and that Lake Erie was going to become a Dead Sea from eutrophication. And we got that stopped. And Soapy was a remarkable fellow. He'd travel the state left and right. He'd attend any kind of wedding or things of that kind, dance with the ladies. People used to say if you had three people meeting under a street light somewhere, why Soapy'd show up to meet.
Show up and meet, greet, yeah.
He used to work so hard he'd travel around the state, but as he traveled around, his driver would give him time for a 5-minute nap so he could rebuild himself. But he was a great governor, and he turned the state around.
You mentioned as good friends Bill Ford and Senator Phil Hart.
They were both good friends, but I had a lot of others. Lucia Nedzi, Jim O'Hara were great friends. And we had wonderful friendships in the Congress then. Ford was particularly close. We wound up representing halves of what had been the 16th district. That was the biggest district in the United States. Had better than 800,000 people. So they cut it in two and gave me half and gave Billy half. And the district had been used to being a single district. So we used to run it like a single district. We'd have conferences where we'd bring our educators down, conferences where we'd bring our municipal officials down. And the result was that the district became the two districts became sort of like one, and they were a very important tool for providing services to people. Lately, the ethics committee has changed it so I can't do that. It's pretty hard to work with my colleagues now to have joint meetings and things of that kind, because for some strange reasons they say that there's something unethical about this thing.
How does that work? I mean,
well, they've never explained it to me, so I can't explain it to you.
But you feel now a greater inability, or there's more difficulty in collegiality.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for it. We've become essentially a soundbite government, a soundbite Congress. There's this gotcha in the press, and every time I deal with a green reporter while he's out to become a Woodward or somebody like that, and catch every elected official he can doing something wrong. The atmosphere in the Congress has been very poisonous since Gingrich started leading the Republicans. And we all spend most of our time at home now. And the result of that is that we wind up with not getting to know each other. So it's become very hard for us to work together on things. I always ran the committee, or any committee, subcommittee or committee of which I was chairman, as in as bipartisan a fashion as I could, because I always thought that the best legislation came about that way. And it led to some ill will and gas pains on the part of some of my liberal friends who thought that was the wrong thing to do. But everybody down there has got an election certificate, and they all serve about 800,000 people. And those 800,000 people are like every other 800,000 people that's represented down there. They're entitled to have their voice heard, and I always saw to it that was done. But the members don't get to know each other. And the things that used to draw them together, they aren't there. And the way the House is run now, we're using Gingrich's model. As a result, there's huge ill will on the part of the Republicans, just as there was on the part of the Democrats when he used those same tactics on us.
How would you characterize that? What tactics?
Well, they largely closed the minority out of the business. I've always tried to bring the minority in because I thought that we could get better legislation. Had two guys that, when I was a subcommittee chairman, that were known as being very right-wing. One was a great guy by the name of H.R. Gross, used to drive John McCormick and Sam Rayburn.
He's from Iowa?
Iowa.
Yeah, I grew up in Iowa, and I remember that.
Well, you'd know the name.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful guy. And somebody said, Dingell, how are you going to run your committee with him, the subcommittee with him there? I said, well, it's the greatest thing in the world. I said, if I can sell Gross on a conservation bill, and I've got him supported, I don't have to worry about the right wing. And it worked out that way. And then I got a fellow by the name of Brown, Clarence Brown, from Ohio, to be the ranking member when I was chairman of the Energy and Power Subcommittee. And we wrote all kinds of legislation at that time. That was during the 70s. And we wrote good legislation. We did it with cooperation. We fought like cats and dogs, but we always knew how to work together, and we knew when we had things to the point where we could have a compromise, we knew we had to be ready. And we'd have a lot of meetings which would go till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'd sit next to Brown. I'd say, Brown. I'd have my hand over my face and say, Brown, make this motion. Brown would say, why should I do that? I'd say, don't give me any sass, Brown. Just make the motion. Well, the end result was that Brown, who had a reputation for a very acerbic sense of humor, which he used on me, and I became very, very good friends. And we hammered out legislation, which was really milestone legislation. We pushed through a lot of the early energy conservation legislation. We pushed through legislation which deregulated natural gas and did it in such a remarkable way that natural gas price actually fell because